Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Goliath here. Today I wanted to go over how Urgot is feeling in 12.10 so far, since I finally got some games under my belt now. And I also want to go into a little bit of 12.11 and just kind of do like a little patch rundown. So starting off with 12.10, how's Urgot feeling so far? Honestly, I think it's probably the worst he's ever felt to me. I've gone from Masters 170 LP to D2 0 LP, so I've lost about 370 LP. And you know, I do think a little bit of that is me as well, just maybe not playing as well as I should be, or as I could be. But I do think a lot of that is also Urgot just not being as strong as he used to be. So the things that I've noticed, I'm just going to give all my reasons of what I've noticed on this patch so far. Number one, the early game just feels much harder to me. With everybody being tankier, it's really hard to get like a good level 1 to level 3 star on Urgot now. You pretty much never really solo kill people because they're just too tanky. And even though on last patch it was still hard to kill people level 1, you could get them chunked out enough to where you could set up a kill maybe level 2 or 3. And I just find it really hard to do that now. Reason number two, I think the counter matchups have gotten way harder. So I think anything that builds Riftmaker, like especially Mordekaiser, I feel like has gotten a lot harder on this patch. Even with Ma, it's really hard to win against him still in the mid game. I also think the new Olaf, the reworked Olaf, I think is really strong right now, and it's especially good into Urgot. Thankfully, not too many people are playing Olaf, but I think eventually people will catch on to how strong he is. And there's going to be a lot more Olaf tops in the future, I'm thinking. But other than that, the Gwen matchup has felt harder. Camille has felt harder. Like anything that builds Divine plus Death Dance feels way harder on this patch as well. So reason number three, I don't think the meta is very good for Urgot. With everybody playing these like really heavy scaling champions, Urgot just honestly really struggles against these type of champions. And Urgot's mid game is really good, but his late game, like 30-35 plus minute, isn't that great. And all these champions that people are playing right now in the meta, like Zelene, Vayne, Senna, Veigar, Anivia, all this stuff is really hard for Urgot to play teamfights into. And this is just a handful of champions that are good against him. There's many more that people are playing right now that I probably left out. Stuff like Kayle, Nasus even. And the list just goes on of like scaling champions. In general, people are just playing more scaling champions because the games go on longer, so it makes sense that there's more of those champions on this patch. And I think they're also going to tune them down a little bit. I know a few of the champions, they are going to tune them down, which I'll get into here once we talk about the next patch. So those are the main reasons that I've noticed why Urgot is maybe struggling a little bit more on this patch. So now let's talk about the things that got a little bit better on this patch, in my opinion. So I think matchups that tried to burst you with like one combo got a little bit easier. So I think stuff like Riven, Irelia, you can actually survive their combo now, and it seems much easier to just overall survive the lane. They can't just like completely snowball on you anymore. The problem is not many people are playing those champions right now. Everyone's going for like true damage and just like scaling. So they are kind of rare, and people also don't really pick those champs into Urgot because Urgot's always done pretty good against stuff like Riven anyway. So I guess you could say it seems like the easier matchups got a little bit easier. Another thing that I've noticed on this patch is turret diving is way harder, and I feel like this can be good and bad since Urgot is pretty good at outplaying turret dives. But I've noticed in the games where I get really behind, I don't just get permadove anymore by the jungle, which is really nice. That used to happen a lot on last patch. If you get behind top lane, jungle would just camp up there and they would just turret dive you and just turret dive into the Shelly play, and it just wouldn't be very playable. So I've noticed less of that on this patch, which is pretty nice if you do happen to get behind. Another thing that I've noticed is the mid game does feel a little bit better if you do manage to have a good early game. Although, like I said, having a good early game is a little bit tougher. But if you do manage that, I feel like the mid game does feel better, especially once you get that level 13 spike and your shotguns are on the 2.5 second cooldown. Like, that feels really good on this patch. It's always felt good, but it feels really good now because everybody's just tankier, so they do a little bit more damage. So that's been my experience so far with the good and the bad for Urgot on this patch. Moving on to things that I've changed with the build and runes and some stuff that I'm experimenting with that I feel like is probably better on this patch moving forward. Number one, and something that I'm actually really liking, is I've dropped Resolve Tree secondary unless I really need bone plating for the matchup. And this is because you're just tankier now, so I don't see the need for Resolve anymore, I suppose. I've been going Biscuits plus Approach Velocity, and the Biscuits really help with the early game, and then Approach Velocity just helps you stick to people. It helps with the early game and the late game a lot. I've noticed that you can't burst some champions anymore even after landing your E. So Approach Velocity really just helps you stick to them and actually secure that kill. if they do try to run away. And this combined with your cleavers, like just enough movement speed to actually stick to people. Another thing that I really like about the approach velocity is it helps you land E's on people in lane. So you can go for a Q and then run at them and go for that E. And even if they're playing pretty passively, you can sometimes catch up with that approach speed to land that E. And if you don't run approach, like you can sometimes QE when the person's playing really far back and you won't even catch up to get an E range if they're playing really safe. So ever since I started doing this rune page secondary, I feel like my games have just felt a lot better and it's been really nice. As far as the build goes, I feel like Black Cleaver first is a must now. I was already doing Cleaver first a lot before the durability patch, but now it's definitely my favorite starting item for sure. The build path is good, it's cheaper than Titanic, and because Urgot stacks it up so fast, it really just helps you shred people and stick to them, which is especially crucial right now since everybody's just tankier. I've also switched over to going more for the damage mythics rather than tanky mythics right now. This is just because it doesn't feel good to tank up at all when everybody's playing like scaling champions. A lot of people are playing true damage champions on this patch, so tanking just feels pretty bad. Keep in mind though, once 12.11 hits, which I'll get into that in a little bit here with the whole patch rundown, there's going to be a lot of buffs to the tank items, so maybe once that patch hits, I'll start experimenting with those again. I think I will, honestly. Another thing that I've also teched in is the Shrildia's Grudge in a few of my games, which feels really nice on this patch. I don't have a ton of games with it so far, but it does feel nice. It also procs your approach velocity, which is some really nice synergy there. I still need to get more games with Shrildia's Grudge, and I'm still not exactly sure when to fit it in the build. It seems like more of like a fourth item, like third, fourth item maybe. Maybe if you're going like tank, something I want to experiment with once they buff the tank items is Cleaver Frostfire into Grudge and try to get it third item, and then you'll be like kind of tanky because of the Frostfire. But we'll play around with that, we'll see. I'm really not sure when I like it in the build. The item feels really good, but I feel like if you build it too early, then you're just too squishy, and like there's other core items you need, I feel like. But it definitely does feel really good. It's definitely a really fun item, especially if you run approach velocity, because the way that it works is your passive shotguns count as an ability. So every time you get a shotgun off, you're slowing them down, and then you're speeding yourself up because of the approach velocity. So yeah, that's been really fun on this patch. I've also experimented with going Ignite in the harder matchups that also have a little bit of healing. So stuff like Darius, Gwen, Mordekaiser, champs like this. It's felt pretty good to me. I always end up missing my teleport mid and late game though, so I'm not entirely sure how I feel about Ignite yet. But it definitely has helped me with the early game, and if the early game's harder now, it might be worth it to run Ignite just to help out with that. So again, still kind of a small sample size there, but it has felt pretty good so far to me. But yeah, other than Cleaver first and teching in Grudge in a few matches and going more for like damage mythics, nothing has really changed with the build so far. It's still relatively the same. Maybe it will change a little bit on the next patch, since there's going to be a lot of item changes and like buffs and whatnot. But yeah, with that being said, let's go over the 12.11 notes. And one thing I do want to say before we jump in here is I do think this patch is actually pretty good overall. And I think it's going to be pretty good for Urgot, because a lot of the stuff that I'm struggling with right now is going to be nerfed in this patch. So that's pretty nice. There's no like specific Urgot buff, but there's a lot of indirect buffs with other stuff getting nerfed. So the way that I'm going to do this, I'm just going to throw this stuff up on screen so you guys can read over it yourselves, and I'm just going to talk about it in the background. I'm also going to cover just mostly the stuff that like relates to top lane and Urgot. So starting off with the champion buffs, we have Irelia getting Q healing buff and E cooldown buff. I honestly don't think this is too big of a deal. Like I said, I think Irelia's gotten a lot easier, so I think this is going to be fine. We have Gragas getting a Q AP ratio buff, a Q cooldown buff, and an E cooldown buff, which is actually kind of a lot. Apparently Gragas is struggling right now as well. Honestly, Gragas matchup is kind of boring, but I don't think it's too bad for Urgot, so I don't think this is too big of a deal. Next up, we got Ryze getting an E damage buff and an E mana cost buff as well. This is kind of scary. Ryze top lane is actually really good against Urgot. So yeah, don't want to see that one come back in the top lane meta. I think people will probably play him more mid lane though, just because Ma exists in the game right now, which makes playing AP top lane just way harder in general. We got a Tahm Kench buff coming in. On hit damage is going up, Q heal is going up, and R shield is going up. That's actually a lot of buffs for the Tahm Kench. I honestly haven't really seen Tahm Kench top in a while. It seems like people mainly play him support now with like a Senna combo or like Nasus Wukong combo. So I don't know if people are going to keep doing that or if they're going to try to bring back the Tahm Kench top. It does seem like a decent buff for Tahm Kench top, so Yeah, we'll see. We'll see on that one. Tom Kench is honestly a really hard lane for Urgot, but you do scale into him very well. And then lastly, for the champion buffs, we have Tryndamere getting a Q base heal and also Q bonus heal per Fury. So he's going to just have more healing on the Q, which is honestly pretty annoying. Our cooldown is also getting reduced by about 10 seconds, it looks like. Apparently, Tryndamere is struggling on this patch as well, so I don't think this will be too big of a deal. And yeah, overall, the champion buffs don't look too bad. Nothing is like super good against Urgot here, so all in all, looks not too shabby to me. So moving on to the champion nerfs here. Again, I'm just going to throw these up on screen and kind of go over them really quickly. Gwen is finally getting nerfed. I think Gwen is insane on this patch with Riftmaker, and she just does like a bunch of true damage and heals a lot too. Just everything is really good about Gwen right now, so they're nerfing her pretty good. Looks like they're mostly targeting her W. We got Senna with a actually pretty decent nerf, I would say. This is really good because I've seen a lot of Sennas on this patch, and it's really hard for Urgot to play into Senna. So that getting nerfed is definitely going to help us out a little bit. Swain's getting tuned down a little bit. Swain in teamfight seems absolutely crazy right now to me, so that's pretty good. They're finally nerfing the E cooldown on Veigar, which is his cage ability, at least in the late game, by 2 seconds, which is pretty nice. That's another champion that's really good into Urgot and kind of makes teamfights unplayable if he uses his cage properly to like zone you out. And then we got Wukong getting nerfed, which is mostly a jungle nerf, which is kind of sad because I think if they nerf him jungle, people are going to play him more top lane. That's what I'm worried about. And Wukong top lane is actually still really good. He is mainly a jungle right now, but I think top lane, at least into Urgot, I think it's very good. So I hope people don't move over from the jungle to the top lane with the Wukong nerfs. And then we also got the champion adjustments on here. They're adjusting Olaf a little bit, and I think overall, I was talking with a viewer for my stream, and overall this seems like a buff to the Olaf lane, which is really weird, because Olaf lane is like destroying top lane right now, and he's extremely good into Urgot too, but he's really good into a lot of other champs as well. And it seems like they're buffing his lane phase, but he's going to be a little bit worse late game. That's what it seems like to me with these changes, and that's honestly really scary. I don't know why they're doing that, but apparently they are, so we'll see how that plays out. So moving on to the item buffs, there's a lot of juicy stuff here for Urgot. Firstly, we got Eclipse, which is getting more lethality. For anyone that doesn't know, on this patch, everyone got more armor, and lethality is basically just flat armor pen. So all of the lethality items just got straight up worse because people are just straight up tankier with their base stats. Now, the thing that's unfortunate about this Eclipse buff is they're adding in a range penalty on the 6% max HP. So that's when you proc that Eclipse, it does that 6% max HP burst damage. And they're making that 3% for range, which, again, Urgot counts as a range champ here, which is really unfortunate. So the lethality is getting buffed, but it's probably going to end up being a little bit of a buff for Urgot, because I think 4 lethality is still more of a buff, even though they're taking off the 3% max HP when you proc Eclipse. So I think overall that still is going to be a little bit better. Prowler's Claw is just straight up getting 4 lethality, no range penalty there, thankfully. Prowler's does still feel okay to me. I've done a few games on it on this patch. You can definitely notice like people are tankier. You can't burst them as much, but you do still feel really strong. I recommend only building this into like really heavy squishy team comps. Like squishy range team comps is when you want to go for the Prowler's Claw, in my opinion, at least on Urgot. Moving on, we got the Gore Drinker getting a mythic passive haste buff. It's going from 5 to 7 per legendary item. Honestly, this is the worst part about Gore Drinker on Urgot, is the mythic passive, so this is kind of sad. I was hoping they would do another buff. Like, this really benefits champs like Riven, maybe Irelia, just champs that really rely on their cooldowns. This is going to be a pretty massive buff too. But unfortunately, not that good for Urgot. Ability haste really isn't that important on Urgot. It's decent for getting like a double E off in a team fight sometimes, but compared to other champions, Urgot just doesn't utilize it as much as other champions do. We got Sterak's Gauge getting 40% base AD to 45% base AD, so more damage on the Sterak's Gauge. It is your base AD, so again, you want to build this item like later on in the game. And then the shield is also going from 70% bonus HP to 75%, so 5% base AD, 5% bonus HP shield. Honestly, pretty decent sized Sterak's buff for Urgot, I would say. It makes me really want to try out like a Juggernaut build with like Frostfire, just get a bunch of bonus HP. And speaking of bonus HP, they're making every single tank mythic give 100 extra bonus HP. So Frostfire, Sunfire, Chem Tank, it's all going from 350 to 450, which is honestly pretty big, man. Extra 100 HP. That's very solid, but also definitely very needed on this patch. Like I said earlier in the video, I was doing tank build a lot when the patch first hit, and I think that's why I lost so much of my LP, because tank builds just don't feel good at all right now. So it's nice to see them buffing these up. Randuin's Omen is getting an extra 10 armor. Not really too much to say about this buff. It does surprise me a little bit because I think Randuin's is already kind of a decent item, so extra 10 armor, that is pretty decent. Looks like they're also doing the same thing with Spirit Visage, extra 10 MR. Honestly, Spirit Visage isn't really that good on Urgot unless you have like Ocean, Soul, plus Enchanter on your team, just like healing a bunch. This does kind of worry me about other champs that have a lot of healing. But as far as Urgot goes, man, I would just stick with Maw and Force of Nature. I think those are the best MR items. Maybe a Stone Plate as well, depending on like what type of build you're going for. Moving on to the system nerfs and system adjustments, it looks like they're actually lowering the turret damage a little bit, which I think I'm okay with that, because it doesn't look like they're lowering it by too much, and they really did up the turret damage. Like, you can really feel it on this patch, so I'm alright with that one. The Everfrost slow / stun duration is going from 1.5 to 1 second. Really nice to see, honestly. The item is super good, and it's also what makes Vigar really good as well. So again, another like indirect Vigar nerf, which is good. These items like Everfrost are also just really good in Urgot because your hitbox is so big, so it's really hard to like play around the middle line that stuns you. They're also nerfing Liandry's burn damage, which is good. I don't know why they didn't nerf that at the very start of the patch. It was like one of the only HP percent items that didn't get nerfed, which I thought was really weird. Next up, we got Riftmaker going down 10 AP. I think Riftmaker is still going to be playable. I think it's absolutely insane on this patch. So decent nerf. I honestly thought they would hit the true damage a little bit on this item, which is kind of surprising they didn't. Definitely still going to be playable. But with that Frostfire getting buffed up and Riftmaker getting nerfed, we might see a little bit more tank Mordekaiser, which is actually kind of annoying because I think tank Mord is actually really good into Urgot compared to AP Mord. I don't know, we'll see though. I think AP Mord is definitely still going to be playable with Riftmaker 100%. This nerf isn't too bad. And then we got another very slight nerf on the Maw of Malmortius. They're raising the cooldown by 15 seconds. I'm really surprised that's all they're doing to Maw. This item is super good against AP champs. Like if they have 2 or 3, if they have 3 plus AP, it feels like you can just build Maw and be completely unkillable. So I feel like an extra 15-second cooldown on it proccing isn't going to make that much of a difference. Obviously it will in some instances, but I think overall I'm surprised they didn't hit this item a little bit harder, to be honest. Next up, we got Death Dance. It looks like they're lowering the heal ratio from 140% down to 120% of your bonus AD. Again, I'm kind of surprised they didn't hit this item a little bit harder as well. Overall, though, I think it's still a decent nerf. This item definitely needs to be nerfed, at least on melee champs. I wish it didn't have such a range penalty, because then it would be so good on Urgot, man. I miss the old days of the Cleaver Death Dance build. But yeah, this item is really good into Urgot right now, because it just gives you armor plus damage. That's what you want into Urgot. So it's nice to see that get nerfed down a little bit. Looks like they're also nerfing lethal tempo for range champs, which is great for us Urgot players. Really rough for kill players and like Vayne players. I guess they can also go press the attack. There are some other options there, but yeah, they are nerfing this for range champs, which is pretty nice. At least for us, since we don't use lethal tempo. I've actually tried lethal tempo on Urgot just for fun, because it does increase your W range, and it just felt terrible, man. I couldn't get a single good game with it, so definitely don't recommend running that on Urgot. And for the last nerf, they're nerfing Kraken Slayer, bonus true damage. Also really nice to see. There's too much true damage on this patch. That's one thing I've noticed, so I definitely want to see them tune that down a little bit, which it looks like they are, slightly. So good to see. So moving on to the system adjustments, Grievous Wounds is going from 30/50% down to 25 to 40%. So they're reducing healing across the board, which is really interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about this, honestly. I already don't like building anti-heal on Urgot, so maybe running Ignite is going to be even better in some games. I'm not really sure, to be honest. This seems like a pretty weird change to me. I definitely don't think it's beneficial for Urgot because we don't really have too much healing, and sometimes we can struggle against like heavy healing champions. So yeah, this change is a little bit weird to me. It looks like they're raising the Thorn damage on Bramble by 1, which is actually kind of annoying for Urgot because it does proc on every single W, the reflection damage. And then for Thornmail, they're actually making it's 10 base damage on the Thorns, but they're making it 20% bonus armor instead of 10%. So Thornmail is going to do a lot more reflection damage late game if you're stacking armor, which is actually pretty rough for Urgot, man. I do not like that change, but I guess they're really trying to bring tanks back on this patch. And not only that, I guess they just want to buff up the Grievous items in general, since they're going to do less healing now. Yeah, they're also buffing Executioner Culling plus 5 AD buff. And then also Chempunk Chainsword is getting a 10 AD buff actually, and then they're also giving 10 ability haste to it too. So they're really buffing up the upgraded components like the Chainsword and the Thornmail. They're really buffing those, and then just slightly buffing the Executioner and Bramble. So that's pretty interesting, because right now a lot of games with anti-heal, you kind of just sit on that first component until you actually finish your build. Like, you never really upgrade it usually. So I guess they want people to start upgrading those, like, maybe sooner in the game, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, that's going to do it for the patch notes. I think that honestly looks pretty good to me. A lot of stuff is getting nerfed that I think is going to be just better for the game, a little bit healthier. And I kind of have the thought right now that even though it's pretty rough for Urgot right now, once they balance things out and maybe like tone down the true damage a little bit, I think overall this whole durability patch is going to be more beneficial for the game. I am a fan of longer games, and I am a fan of people not just getting like completely one-shot by assassins. Like, that has been really refreshing to see on this patch. So I think once they just find the balance of like toning down the true damage, especially, I think that's the big thing, and maybe tuning down like some of the scaling champs, which it looks like they're starting to do, which is nice, then I feel like the game will be a lot funner, and I feel like it'll be a little bit better for Urgot. I can't really tell by how much, and we'll keep playing around with like the item builds and everything. Like I said, I kind of just started running the whole like approach velocity plus biscuits secondary, and that's been feeling really good. So we'll keep limit testing stuff like that, try to find new ways to make Urgot feel a little bit better on this patch. But yeah, if you guys did enjoy the video, if you want to drop a thumbs up, that would be appreciated, and let me know what I can improve on. And also, yeah, let me just know what you liked and disliked. I feel like this video probably came off a little bit rambly. I feel like that's kind of the nature of these videos, but also I'm like still kind of new to making these type of videos, so I'm still trying to improve on this style of video. So yeah, let me know in the comments, and also just let me know your thoughts on everything. Like, how's Urgot feeling to you on the durability patch, and do you think he's gonna feel better next patch? Like, what have you guys been struggling with? What have you guys found? I'd be very curious to hear that. So yeah, let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and I wish you all a good day.